She was just a fruit seller girl with no money, no power, just a soft heart and a tired smile, struggling to survive and take care of her sick mother. He was a billionaire, lonely, lost, and stranded on the street with no one to call. She gave him her last money without asking for anything in return. And that simple act changed everything. Sit back and enjoy this powerful story of self-discovery, sacrifice, and the kind of love that begins in the most unexpected places. And don't forget to subscribe, like and comment. The sun had barely risen when Amelia Thompson tied the frayed cloth of her mother's wrapper around her waist and stepped barefoot into the red dirt road. The morning air clung to her skin, thick with the scent of charcoal smoke, fried yam, and dust. All around her, the market was slowly waking, metal shutters screeched open, women balanced baskets on their heads, and a few early hawkers called out half-heartedly, still nursing sleep in their voices. Amelia carried her tray of mangoes on her head, her back already aching from the weight, not of the fruit, but of the life she had to carry. She was 23, though life had aged her eyes beyond her years. Her father had died when she was 12, swept away by the swollen river during the long rains. Her mother, once full of laughter and plans, now lay silent in bed most days, weakened by a sickness no local doctor could name. Their tiny one-room home leaned to the left like it was tired too, and Amelia's daily mission was simple: sell enough to feed them both, and save what she could for medicine. Yet despite it all, she wore a tired but genuine smile, the kind that held warmth even when her stomach growled. As the bus terminal filled with people, some with fancy handbags and suitcases, others with chickens in crates, Amelia took her usual spot near the rusting benches. There, under a faded Coca-Cola umbrella, she laid out her mangoes. Sweet like honey. Juicy mango, only 2 Sadies, she sang, forcing cheer into her voice. That's when she saw him. He was tall, much taller than most of the men around. Dressed in clothes that had once been expensive, Italian shoes, tailored slacks, and a white shirt now smudged with dust, he stood awkwardly by the bus line. His hair was slightly unkempt, and he looked around as if the world had tilted under his feet. He patted his pockets once, twice, then again, with rising panic. He turned to the bus conductor and whispered something, but the man only sneered. No money, no seat. Simple. Passengers pushed past him like he was invisible. Some laughed, others scoffed. Amelia watched as he stepped back from the crowd, his hands clenched, eyes scanning the ground like he was hoping to find a coin. But there was something strange about him, something refined beneath the dust. His watch was gone, his shoes scuffed, but his posture still held dignity, like a lion trying not to roar. Without thinking, Amelia reached into the tied corner of her wrapper and pulled out her last 7 Sadies. She had meant to use it for rice that evening, or maybe Panadol for her mother. But something in her chest ached watching the man. Not pity. No, it was something deeper. Recognition. Loneliness knew loneliness. She stepped forward. Excuse me, sir, she said, her voice soft but sure. You can take this, for the fare. The man blinked at her, confused. I didn't ask. I know. But someone once helped me without asking. I'm just returning the favor. He looked at her then, really looked. Into her dark eyes lined with fatigue and fire. His lips parted as if to say something, but the words got lost in his throat. Before he could protest, she handed the money to the conductor. 1 fare, for him, she said. The conductor, not one to care about charity, snatched the bills and waved the man aboard. The stranger hesitated, his gaze lingering on Amelia as if trying to memorize her face. Then, with a slight bow of his head, he climbed in. Amelia turned back to her stall, brushing her hands over her mangoes, pretending her heart wasn't racing. She didn't know who he was. Didn't know that her 7 Sadies were worth more than gold in that moment. Didn't know that her life had just collided with destiny. But the wind that passed through the terminal carried a whisper only the old spirits could hear. Kindness never goes unnoticed. Fate always keeps receipts. The rickety old bus groaned as it rattled over potholes, but Alexander Blake barely noticed. He sat near the window, staring blankly at the sun-scorched fields rushing by, his thoughts heavier than the dust in the air. Nobody on that bus knew him, not the conductor who had grumbled at him for being slow, not the crying baby beside him, not the woman who had paid his fare without even asking his name. Not one soul on that bus could have guessed that the man in the dusty white shirt was once featured on the cover of Forbes Africa. That his name echoed through boardrooms in London and Accra. That he, Alexander Kwame Blake, was the heir to the Blake Group, a transnational real estate and logistics empire. But wealth, like water, slips easily through the fingers of the careless. And today, he was broke. Lost. Stripped of all the armor his name once gave him. 3 days earlier, he'd landed in Ghana under a false name, determined to discreetly investigate whispers of embezzlement in the West African branch of his company. Trusted allies had turned silent, files had gone missing, and millions had vanished. He'd grown up between Accra and Manchester, and despite his boardroom polish, he still trusted his gut. His instincts had told him to come in person, without bodyguards or press. But one mistake, one evening drink with the wrong friend, and everything had unraveled. His wallet, gone. His phone, stolen. His trusted Ghanaian driver, vanished. His identity, too dangerous to reveal. And now, he had nothing but the clothes on his back, and a mind teetering on the edge of rage. But then, she had helped him. That girl. He hadn't even gotten her name. As the bus jolted to a stop in a remote town outside Kumasi, Alexander stepped off and felt the weight of the heat settle on his shoulders again. Flies buzzed around him, and the scent of grilled maize wafted through the air. The place was unfamiliar, quiet, poor, and yet, alive. It was safer than Accra for now. Anonymous. He found a worn-out guest house tucked behind the mosque, where an elderly caretaker allowed him to stay in exchange for sweeping the grounds and helping fix the gate. At night, he lay on the thin mattress staring at the rusted ceiling fan, the girl's face imprinted in his thoughts. Her voice had been soft, but firm. Her eyes, tired, but bright. She had acted without fear or hesitation. Just, human. No agenda. No angle. No idea who he was. It took only a short walk to reach the market. And there she was, bent over a wooden table, arranging mangoes in neat little pyramids, humming a tune that clashed with the weariness in her eyes. He stayed in the shadows, watching. She joked with children who ran past her stall, even offered a bruised mango to a boy whose clothes hung on him like rags. She greeted an old blind woman who passed by every hour, placing a piece of fruit in her hand for free. She didn't even seem to notice how little she kept for herself. Alexander watched her bargain with a stubborn supplier, handle 2 customers at once, and quietly slip a coin to a young girl being beaten by her guardian. His chest tightened. This was not charity. This was survival with grace. This was a heart that gave even when it was starving. He could return to Accra, to his lawyers, to his empire once the dust settled. But first, he would stay. Not out of guilt. Not out of romance. Out of curiosity. Out of need. Out of something he couldn't yet name. He introduced himself again, but not as Alexander Blake. This time, just Kwame. "I'm looking for work," he told her, pretending his accent was heavier than it was. She raised a skeptical brow. "You don't look like a man who peels mangoes for a living." He shrugged. "Everyone starts somewhere." Amelia studied him for a long moment, then handed him a knife and pointed to a pile of overripe fruit. "Let's see if your hands match your mouth, Kwame." And just like that, the billionaire became a fruit stall assistant. Every evening, as the sun dipped and cast long shadows over the village, he felt the weight of his lie. She was honest, painfully so. He was hiding behind dust and borrowed silence. But he also began to feel lighter. For the first time in years, he was invisible. Not a headline. Not a bank balance. Just a man. He didn't know where this would lead. He only knew that the girl who gave him her last coin had more power than anyone he'd ever met. And somewhere in the cracks of this market, fate was watching, threading 2 lives together with a whisper. "You came looking for answers, Alexander. But what if what you really needed was her?" It began with the kind of clouds that warned the elders before they even looked up, slow, gray, swollen things that hovered over the town like spirits remembering something painful. The market women tied plastic over their stalls. Chickens ran in circles. Radios crackled with static. Amelia glanced at the sky, sighing as she tightened the rope holding her umbrella to the wooden pole above her stall. She couldn't afford for it to rain. Not today, not when her mother had run out of medicine that morning, and the last of their food had been boiled into a thin soup the night before. She needed every sadie she could make. But nature, like fate, has its own agenda. He'd swept the front of the stall without being asked, humming a tune in a language she didn't recognize. Though he claimed he was just a wanderer, There was something strange about the way he held himself, how his hands, though calloused now, moved with an elegance that betrayed his past. Still, she didn't press him. Everyone in that town carried a secret like a gourd on their head, balanced, silent, unspoken. Today, he wore a faded blue shirt, sleeves rolled up, and wiped mango juice off his hands with a cloth he'd stitched himself. He worked like someone trying to remember what it meant to be human. Amelia didn't know whether to be amused or suspicious. But when the first drops of rain fell, he looked at her, and she saw it, worry. Not for himself, for her. It was sudden, violent. Not a drizzle, not a warning. A full downpour, like grief from the heavens. Water gushed from the rooftops, the dusty earth turned to mud in seconds, and people scattered like ants. Amelia lunged to cover her stall with a torn sheet of plastic, but the wind yanked it away. Mangoes rolled into the mud, some smashed under running feet. Her hands shook as she tried to gather them, clothes soaked, hair plastered to her face. Kwame, soaked to the bone, jumped in beside her, shielding her with his body as best he could. He grabbed the umbrella pole as it nearly flew loose, holding it down with both arms. "You'll catch cold," she shouted. He laughed, breathless. "And miss this kind of baptism." They worked together in silence, water running down their faces like tears neither of them had yet cried. The rain passed as quickly as it had come, leaving silence in its wake. Amelia's stall was half flooded. A third of her fruits were ruined. She stood still, her lips trembling, blinking fast to hide the sting in her eyes. Kwame picked up a bruised mango from the mud and gently placed it on the table. "We can wash some of them. Salvage what's left." But Amelia only stared at the ground. "It won't be enough," she said softly. "Even if I sell them all, it won't cover the medicine. I shouldn't have come today. I should have stayed with her." Kwame paused. "Your mother?" She nodded. "She gets worse with the cold. Today was bad." She barely spoke. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he quietly began gathering what fruit he could save. "Let me help. We'll figure it out." Amelia returned home alone, dragging what remained of her goods in a basket wrapped in cloth. She found her mother asleep, her breathing shallow but steady. She didn't expect anything to change. But the next morning, someone knocked on her door. It was the local clinic nurse, out of breath, holding a clipboard. "Miss Thompson," she said. "A donor has paid for your mother's treatment, full diagnosis, medication, everything. We've already arranged the transport." Amelia froze. "A donor? Who?" The nurse shrugged. "No name. Just an envelope. With this." She handed her a folded slip of paper. It read, "For the woman who gave her last coin. The sky weeps, but sometimes, so does heaven." There was no signature. Alexander, still Kwame to everyone else, stood in the back of the local pharmacy, counting crisp bills from a hidden pocket sewn inside his travel bag. His clothes still smelled faintly of damp fruit. He looked out the window at the street below, where Amelia passed, carrying a bucket of water. She didn't see him. But he saw her. And something in his chest stirred, a feeling he hadn't known in years. Gratitude. Admiration. And the first flutter of fear. Because the more he watched her, the more he realized he was losing control of the lie. And the truth, like the rain, would come when it wished. The dry season returned with dusty winds and golden sunsets, and life in the village slowly resumed its rhythm. The market stalls bustled once again, mangoes ripe under the sun, and Amelia's little corner had begun to draw attention, not just for the fruit, but for the strange man who now worked beside her. "Your husband," the old women would whisper. "No, no, just a friend," she would reply with a small smile, though even she could not explain what he was to her. Kwame had become a fixture of her days. He repaired the stall, taught the neighbors' children mathematics in the evenings, and once even chased off a drunk who tried to harass one of the market girls. Still, he remained careful, never revealing too much, never answering questions about where he came from or where he would go next. Amelia respected his silence, but sometimes, in the quiet moments between peeling mangoes and boiling water at night, she wondered, who was he really? And why did it feel like he wasn't just hiding from the world, but from himself? They sat together after closing, watching the sky melt into hues of tangerine and pink. Children laughed in the distance. Amelia was sorting leftover fruit for the goats when she noticed Kwame rubbing his left wrist. It was a habit she'd seen before. He always wore a wristband or tied cloth, even in the heat. But today, the band was off, perhaps forgotten in haste. And that's when she saw it. A scar. It was clean, almost surgical, curved in a crescent with a faint symbol at its center. Not the kind of mark life gives in accident. No. This was deliberate. Almost branded. "Where did you get that?" she asked before she could stop herself. Kwame froze. His hand dropped instinctively, trying to cover it. But it was too late. "It's nothing. Just an old thing from when I was young." But Amelia stared at it, eyes narrowing. She had seen that mark before. Not in real life, but in a magazine, years ago, at the pharmacist's. A charity gala in the UK. A photo of a man smiling beside a prince. And on his wrist, that exact scar. The caption had read, "Alexander Blake, CEO of Blake Group, showcases the rare heirloom mark, symbol of his family's private legacy." Her breath caught. She turned slowly to look at him. The quiet man who peeled mangoes, swept floors, and watched her with eyes that saw everything and yet said nothing. "You're not who you say you are you?" she whispered. He didn't answer. Instead, he looked at the sunset. And for the first time since she met him, he looked tired. Not physically, but spiritually. As if carrying a burden he had long hidden from. He didn't move. "When you paid my bus fare," he said finally, "you didn't ask me who I was. You just gave what you had, without expecting anything." "I still wouldn't have," she said. "Even if I knew." He smiled faintly, sadly. "Exactly. That's why I stayed." Amelia swallowed hard. "So what now? You go back to your world and leave this one behind?" "I don't know what my world is anymore," he said, voice barely above a whisper. He walked her home, as he always did, but the air between them was changed. Every silence was heavier. Every step echoed with the weight of the truth. Amelia sat by her mother's bedside long after he left, staring at the scar that had burned itself into her memory. How many people would give everything to meet a man like Alexander Blake? And here she was, unknowingly working beside him, breaking bread with him, hearing his laughter when he thought no one cared. What did it mean? Why was he here? And why did her heart hurt? A stranger had arrived. Well-dressed, carrying a briefcase, moving with the kind of sharpness that didn't belong to villagers. He visited the local chief. He asked questions. He showed photographs. One of the photos was of a man in a tailored suit, smiling on a yacht. The name under it said, Alexander Kwame Blake. And behind him, the woman at the market stall. It began as a whisper. At first, just murmurs in the market, like dry leaves skittering across the earth. Then, the whispers sharpened, picked up by traders from Accra, spread by travelers and taxi drivers. "A billionaire is missing. They say he disappeared weeks ago in Ghana. Alexander Blake, the one from the UK, heir to the Blake Group. There's a reward. Newspapers are printing his face. TV too." And then came the name, Alexander Kwame Blake. A cold wind blew through the market that morning, not from the sky, but from something deeper. Amelia heard the name while arranging guavas at her stall. She dropped one. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. Kwame. The man who worked beside her. The man who vanished 2 nights ago after showing her the scar. The man who had started as a mystery, and was now a ghost. No note. No goodbye. His old cloth bag was missing. His sleeping mat at the guest house, rolled and vanished like he'd never existed. Amelia checked the alley behind the market where he liked to sit and scribble in his notebook. Empty. She asked the caretaker. He left early. Said he had to travel. Paid his debts in full. That part struck her. Kwame, no, Alexander, had no money. Not here. Not when she found him. So how had he paid? Unless the mask had dropped, and the billionaire had finally come back to himself. Still, part of her hoped it was all some mistake. Until the car came. Its tires stirred the dry earth into clouds, and neighbors peeked from their windows. Amelia opened the door slowly, her sick mother asleep behind her. A well-dressed man stepped out. Dark suit, crisp shirt, foreign shoes. "Miss Amelia Thompson?" he asked, voice clipped, rehearsed. "Yes?" He handed her an envelope. Thick. Heavy. "This is from Mr. Blake. He instructed it be given to you directly." Her heart stopped. She opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a letter, typed, signed. Beneath it, thick bundles of cash in pounds and Ghanaian cedis. And beneath that, a property deed. Her eyes widened. He had bought her mother's medicine supply for a year. Paid for hospital care in the city. Purchased the land her stall stood on. And the title was now in her name. But the letter was what shattered her most. Amelia. I once believed the world worked only in power, money, and strategy. I lived at the top of it. But when I fell, the only hand that reached out to lift me wasn't wearing pearls, it was peeling mangoes. You gave without asking. You trusted without knowing. You offered your last coin, and in that moment, gave me back something I'd lost a long time ago, my soul. Forgive me for lying. I feared if you knew who I was, everything would change. I feared becoming him again. But now, I must return to that world. Because of you, I no longer fear it. Thank you for reminding me what wealth truly means. I promise, this isn't goodbye. A. Blake. Amelia stood frozen, the paper fluttering in her hands like a bird trying to escape. Around her, neighbors whispered, stared. She didn't care. Her mind raced, not because of the money, or the title, but because he was gone. And he hadn't even let her say one thing she desperately needed to say. That she had started to love him. Not the billionaire. Not the heir. Just, him. And far away, in a glass tower in Accra, Alexander Blake stood in a boardroom with glass walls overlooking the sea. The media frenzy had calmed. His executives sat in silent awe. He had returned, calm and collected, armed with evidence of the betrayal he had suspected all along. He had cleaned house. Reclaimed his seat. But his eyes wandered, always, to the window. To the wind. To the name Amelia. He'd left her to protect her. To keep her safe from the vultures that circled his name. But part of him wondered. Had he made a mistake leaving without hearing her answer? Because in that village, the wind had carried more than a name. It had carried a promise. And a longing. And the last breath of a love story waiting for its return. The rains returned before the dry season was done. It wasn't the usual kind, the long, loud, angry storms that tore roofs and scared goats into hiding. No. This rain came gently, like an apology. A soft, rhythmic patter on the earth. Warm, forgiving. The kind that didn't wash things away, but made them grow. Amelia stood beneath the new canopy of her fruit shop, with her name carved above the entrance in polished wood, Amelia's Harvest. She wore a clean wrap skirt and blouse, her natural braids tucked beneath a deep orange headscarf. Her mangoes were stacked neatly in rows, and her hands smelled faintly of oranges and rain. It had been 5 months since he left. Since the black SUV. Since the letter. In that time, her mother had gotten better. The house had been repaired. She'd hired 2 young girls to help her run the stall. The village treated her with a kind of quiet awe now, not because she was rich, but because she had stayed kind. And yet, every evening, just before sunset, she would pause and stare at the road leading out of town. The one he left on. She didn't know if he would return. But some part of her, buried beneath scars and silence, still hoped. Then, on a rainy morning, it happened. She was weighing bananas for an old woman when a shadow stretched across the stall. She looked up slowly. There, stepping out of the mist and rain, was a tall man in a royal blue suit, tailored perfectly, his shoes polished, his hair neatly trimmed, and raindrops clinging to his shoulders like blessings. But his eyes were the same. Kind. Heavy. Watching her like he had been waiting a lifetime to speak. Her heart skipped. "Kwame?" she whispered, unsure if she was dreaming. He gave her a small, lopsided smile. "I was afraid you'd forgotten me." She didn't move. She was frozen between joy and fury, longing and disbelief. "You left," she said. "I did. You didn't let me say anything." "I couldn't," he said. "Because if you asked me to stay, I would have stayed forever. And I needed to fix the world I ran from, before I could be worthy of yours." A silence settled between them, filled with the sound of rain on tarpaulin. Then, he reached into his coat pocket and knelt, right there, in the mud and mango peels. The crowd stilled. Vendors paused. Children gawked. The old woman dropped her bananas. And Amelia couldn't breathe. He pulled out a small box, velvet, damp at the corners, and opened it to reveal a simple ring. Gold, delicate, shaped like a mango leaf wrapped around a tiny sapphire. I didn't come to ask you to leave this life, he said, kneeling lower. I came to ask if I can join yours. Tears filled her eyes. Her lips trembled. You could have had anyone, she said. I didn't need anyone, he replied. Until I met the woman who gave me her last coin without knowing my name. And the rain fell like applause. Soft. Endless. Sweet. The crowd erupted, clapping, laughing, someone even ululated. And Amelia, she laughed too. Through tears. Through disbelief. Through everything. She stepped forward and held out her hand. I never needed a billionaire, she said, just a man with a heart that remembered. He slipped the ring on her finger, then rose and pulled her into a quiet, respectful embrace. And for the first time, the market cheered, not for money, not for status, but for love. A love that had bloomed from mud, mangoes, and a 7 Sadie bus fare. Amelia and Alexander did not move to a mansion. They built a school first. Then a clinic. Then a cold storage facility for the market women. She still sold fruit on weekends. He still walked barefoot sometimes, just to remember. And sometimes, when they told their story to children sitting cross-legged in a classroom painted with sunflowers, she'd end it the same way. Kindness may not change your life the moment you give it. But one day, it might knock on your door, in a suit, and ask you to marry it. And the children would laugh, not knowing. They were laughing at a true story.